When the first Baptist minister came this way to organize a Christian church, nobody rushed to join that right away. According to the history at my church, the first African Baptist church that was organized, it started in '65, formally organized in 1866. Only about a dozen people were baptized that first year, so you had literally hundreds of people here. So if everybody wanted to embrace that right away, then he would have baptized a lot more in that first time.
Eventually, the slaves combined many of their African religious beliefs and practices with those of Christianity and developed their own way of worship.
I will shout, hallelujah. I will shout, oh Lord. I will shout, hallelujah, oh Lord. For you are the source of my supply.
This is a typical example of a praise house building. This one is active now, but they got started on the plantation, right on the edge of the plantation during slavery. People will enter these buildings and they're allowed to worship.
Slave communities used praise as a means of worship and as a means of communicating secret messages to each other.
There were some beautiful sermons preached from the praise house, messages that actually caused people to liberate themselves, and where people would send messages through their sermons.
So now while we're singing and we're shouting, it's providing spiritual covering. It's also providing this covering of sound so that as a person is going out into the wilderness, if some trouble comes up, they shouldn't be able to hear them as easily. If for some reason there's a paddy roller or there's some type of bucker they out trying to look for one of us to get away, then they won't necessarily hear you either. And so we knew what was going on all the while. But not only in our songs was the code, our very language is that, so that we could always commune with one another and communicate with one another, even in the presence of everybody else.
And so you had your leaders, who are the elders. Most of the time they're older people. The male is always in charge. The women were always the people who set the sounds and set the beat for the sound. And at the end of doing singing, there was no music, so they had to form their own music, their own clap, you know, and that hand beat and the foot stomp.
Lord, I'll praise and lift you high. I will shout, hallelujah, oh Lord.
Jonathan Green is an internationally acclaimed artist. His vibrant paintings, celebrating his Gullah heritage, have been featured in movies, magazines, and museums around the world.
The area was so inspirational for me, but as a child, you don't realize how important it is. And it wasn't until I went to the Art Institute, studied the European masters, and then met people from abroad. And one of the people I met encouraged me to come to Switzerland. And I thought, well, it's an opportunity to go abroad. But going to Switzerland, I met the artist, and all of the artists that I met in Switzerland were doing paintings about things they knew. And it seemed for me that their palette was endless. They never had to really think much about what they were painting. And when I returned to the United States, I started looking around and I thought, well, you know, I should be drawing the marsh and landscape and the people. I've been painting basically scenes about my hometown and my environment, and it's just endless. I never have to think of subject matters. I never have to study anything else because it's all readily available. The way of life as we know it is disappearing fast. Not that the population of people are disappearing, but just the importance of the culture. And I feel that so many of the young people today, if they don't have a sense of their culture, then they're not going to have much of a future. Now, my grandmother and mother always said to me that The importance of my life is to paint and to paint about my culture, and so that something will be left behind for people to understand.
Arthur Dilbert is a local woodcarver whose African-inspired designs have won national attention.
Getting into wood carving way back from my child days almost. We used to make certain things to play with. We had to make it, they had to carve it.
The state of Georgia has recognized Dilbert as a master craftsman and has awarded him grants to teach woodcarving as a folk art.
I just love to carve. And when I get an idea, I stick with it until I be successful with it. I feel good. I start beat up some old hymn and start singing my hymns and carving, and I'm happy.
Dilbert's intricately detailed walking sticks are among his coveted signature pieces.
It's a great thing. I wish that I could get at least 15 or 20 more to sit down and run off at the mouth and just cut and cut. It's a great thing. It's a peace of mind to sit down and whittle and cut and beat and come out with something that you can see what you have accomplished. My tools should never be forgotten.
Sapelo Island, Georgia, is one of the last remaining intact Geechee communities within the Gullah Geechee Nation. Situated 60 miles south of Savannah, the 4-mile-wide and 10-mile-long Barrier Island has been described as a 30-minute ferry ride back into Africa and time. The deep emotional connection between the Gullah and Geechee people and the land is eloquently expressed in this excerpted piece by Sapelo Island resident Cornelia Bailey.
I am Sapelo. And all the hundreds of others who are descendants. We who remain here is Sapelo.
To us, this was heaven. People come often and ask me, they said, when you was growing up, what did you miss as a child? And I said, nothing.
I never lost my love for Sapelo Island. Just the culture, the beaches, the peace and tranquility, the vegetation. I look forward to it every day.
I started doing tours because I was riding with my mother. She was doing tours. I learned different things every time I tell a tour. I learned a different thing that I didn't know before. So the tour after them, they get more information because the more I do it, the more I learn. This blue building over here on the left that you see was an old school building that was used for kids in the community. It's no longer used for a school anymore because it was destroyed by the hurricane. So now it's used for a computer lab and a library.
We are one, bound by the spirit of an island.
The pine tree is doing well. It's producing cones, and its lifeblood is coming from the oak.
And Balali the slave, bound by high tide, fields, gossips, smoked mullet, and our faith.
Sapelo is a prototype sea island, the prototype of what these other islands were like. St. Helena Island, Hilton Head Island, Dafusky Island. Before the advent of resort development on these other islands were similarly situated as Sapelo is. where people were still using those basic cultural assets that we brought from West Africa, where people maintained self-sufficiency and also promoted self-sufficiency.
Definitely hold tight now. I ain't got no brakes out. Hold tight.
So where are we going?
To the beach.
What's that?
To the beach. Nantigo Beach.
George Walker is on his way to get dinner, the same way his ancestors have been getting dinner for generations.
When you go to Sapelo and see people fishing with the fish nets and casting the fish nets and fishing on the beach, you're looking at West Africa, and even in today's world.
Look here. There's a log right there. See a log yonder? Go right alongside that log. And I want you to go as far as you could. I'm coming. I'll give you a hand in a minute. Okay, we walk. Daryl, come here. You hold this pole. Keep the pole straight. Don't let it drag the bottom. Just keep off the bottom like that. And help him push, and he pull. How far you going up? How far you gonna go? I'll be up in a minute. Give you a hand.
The people of Sapelo live by a spiritual code that has enabled them to survive against the odds. They have a deep and abiding respect for nature and an understanding of their relationship to it. With harmony as their guiding philosophy, the Gullah and Geechee people believe that in nature nothing is wasted, nothing is exploited, and nothing is abused.
Big shark right there.
Big shark?
Yeah.
Where?
In the net.
In the net?
Yeah, I saw him get in there. Right now, it's good fishing now, summertime. We fish every time the tide is right. One thing I love living on here, you get fresh seafood that you can't get. And on the market, you got like a pocket full of money. You can come out here and get fresh seafood for nothing.
Our existence here on Sapelo starts in the connection from the slave families that were brought to this area. The most famous and documented slave that's in Georgia history that I know of and we're proud of is Gullah Muhammad. Gullah Muhammad was a very famous slave because he spoke many languages. He spoke and wrote in Arabic and English and 5 different languages. He had 8 daughters and over 12 sons. The sons were naturally from that time sold as slaves to other slave families, but most of the daughters were kept here. We have over 44 families that have came from those 8 daughters of Gullah Muhammad.
The ability to adapt is what defines the genesis of the Gullah Geechee culture. But what about its future? Since the 1960s, more and more developers are moving in and claiming the shoreline. Exclusive resorts and high-priced condominiums, as seen on Hilton Head, are trumpeting in a new and imposing future for the nation.
Well, we've survived because we had to. You see these survival shows on television nowadays, and I often chuckle when I watch them because I lived it. Everybody had responsibility, and that responsibility was shared responsibility because we've got an influx now of a different kind of culture that is relying on more things than on self and people. That is causing some strife among Gullah people.
So we must keep people away whose interest is not the survival of the culture, but whose interest is purely financial.
We're trying to hold on to what we got because if the land goes, so does the people. I mean, I cannot function in the middle of Brooklyn doing the same thing I'm doing down here.